and then I will try to address them at the end of this webinar. And especially if you have a question that you don't feel comfortable asking in the group, I would hold off and just send me an email. And you can always send me an email at Beth Tyson or beth@bethtyson.com. So I'm going to click through, and Sarah, who's my amazing assistant, she is in the background checking on the chat because I will be in the screen that shows my my presentation slides. So feel free to either text me, Sarah, or hit the speaker chat button. And if anyone needs anything, hopefully I will see it there. So, all right, let's get started. Disclaimer that this is not for mental health care, that this is an educational webinar only and is not mental health guidance, advice, medical advice, legal, financial, or spiritual advice of any kind. Please seek the help of a licensed medical provider or mental health professional if you feel that you need support with your child or yourself. And please always know that there is a mental health crisis line that is available 24 hours, 7 days a week in the United States. Sorry for those of you in other countries. I see that we have a global audience here today. In the US, you can text or dial the number 988, similar to the way that you would dial 911, and you will be matched up with a mental health crisis support line that will help you through whatever you might be experiencing. They kind of triage your symptoms or your situation and help get you the help that you need immediately. So please consider that if you ever find yourself in an emergency situation. And of course, you could always go to your nearest emergency room. All right. The other disclaimer I have is that please do not record this presentation. This is protected by copyright law, and it can only be recorded or shared with my permission. So please do not record or share this presentation without my permission. I have to say these things. Unfortunately, I've had some bad luck in the past. So I appreciate you understanding that. If you don't know who I am Beth Tyson. I guess I didn't introduce myself. My background is as a psychotherapist for children in the foster care system or who had been in the kinship care or adoption. So kinship care is when grandparents raise grandchildren or other relatives, like maybe an aunt or uncle. Foster care is when somebody the child doesn't know takes them in temporarily while their parents are going through a difficult time. And adoption is when the child is adopted by either a kinship parent or a foster parent because they are unable to go back to their original family. So I worked with those families who are often in crisis and in their homes, trying to stabilize the situations that they were in. Many of those families, if not all, I'm pretty sure all of them, had supervised visitation. So I would see the frustration and the trauma and the emotions and reactions and responses that supervised visitation could cause in these families. And I just realized there's really nobody addressing this. When I did some research, even for this presentation, I could find very little on how to support the child who was going through supervised visitation. I could find lots of stuff on what a parent should do in supervised visitation, but I couldn't find anything for children. I'm also, because of this topic, I was inspired to write a children's book, and it will be out hopefully the first quarter of 2024. And it'll be called Sullivan Goes to See Mama. And it'll be all about a young child who has to visit his mom while she's working on making better decisions for her life. And it's a therapeutic book that's trauma-informed and designed to help children prepare emotionally for visitation as well as cope with what happens after visitation. So I hope you'll check that out when it becomes available. And I'm also the co-chair of HEAL PA's Child Abuse Prevention Team, and we are merging with Prevent Child Abuse America for the state of PA. So I really love that group, and we're doing the best that we can to make our state of Pennsylvania both a trauma-informed and healing-centered state across all systems. If you're in Pennsylvania and you'd like to get involved, or you're from another state and would like to know more, you can always send me an email at beth@bethtyson.com. And I'm also a CASA volunteer, which means I'm an advocate for children in our court systems and child welfare systems who are in foster care and need a voice in front of the judge. I'm on their advisory board as well, and I will be presenting in April at their statewide conference, their statewide Pennsylvania conference. So I'm really excited about that. Coming soon is, like I said, my children's book about supervised visitation. So I just want to make you guys aware of that. It will be available on Amazon, hopefully the first quarter of 2024. And you can make sure that you receive all the information and updates and alerts on that by either following me on social media or joining my newsletter, which is available on my homepage at bethtyson.com. See a little button that says subscribe at the top. So today, like I said, we're talking about preparing children for supervised visitation. We're going to talk about the impact that supervised visitation has on children's mental health and strategies for helping children cope with the overwhelming feelings and behaviors that seem to bubble up around this topic and experience. So I want to start off at the beginning, and maybe some of you already know how to do this well, but I think it's always worth revisiting and having additional ideas. But I'm going to explain supervised visitation to a child in a way that they can understand, but also won't like over alarm them and make them really anxious. So some of my tips are to first always find a calm time and place to talk. That's really important because if a child isn't ready to take in the information, they're not going to hear you anyway. If they're already overwhelmed, if they're already past like a 5 on their stress level of a 1 to 10, if they're already past a 5, they're probably not going to hear or absorb what you're saying. So finding a time of day where they're relaxed, where they're not overstimulated, where they're not already dysregulated and upset about something is important. That might be after homework each night, or that might be during breakfast. It really depends on the child, so you'll have to use some of your discernment there. It's also helpful to talk to children in an honest and direct way. So we tend to get all caught up in our heads as adults, and we get really nervous about how the child's going to react to what we are going to say, because we have a lot of emotions about it. But what actually happens for children is that they just want the information and they haven't attached any feelings or emotions to it yet. So if you are calm and honest and direct, they will receive that information in the same way a lot of times, or at least there's a better chance of them receiving it in an honest, direct way. So it's try to put your emotions and how you feel about the topic to the side and just realize that, this child is hearing it for the first time and they're not going to have all the emotions tied to it that you do. It's important to explain why the supervisitation is happening. That's going to be a question that is circulating around in their minds. So we want to make sure we answer, why? Why do I have to see mom or dad at this place? Why do I have to have somebody there watching me? These are questions that kids will have because it's an unnatural situation. And let's be honest, it's a little strange and uncomfortable. And the more we can be real about that instead of trying to gloss over it or make excuses or make up stories, which I know a lot of us do. And trust me, I'm not immune to any of this. I struggle with my parenting every single day. In fact, we're going through a really hard time at home right now with anxiety. So, this is not just, this is a human problem. All this stuff that we're talking about are human problems, and we all have them. So we want to be able to explain to them why this sort of unnatural, uncomfortable thing is happening and give them some details about what it will be like. So that means we need to educate ourselves first about what it's going to be like. So maybe that's doing some research on the facility that you're going to. And maybe you find some photos. I did a quick search before I came on today and found a couple of different visitation centers that had photos of their play area or their meeting areas. So even if it's not the exact location you're going to, you could show them that as an example. Hey, here's an example of what it could look like or what it will look like, so that they know just mentally what to expect. When we know what to expect, it relieves our anxiety and our nervousness and our fear. So preparing them ahead mentally with images, videos, or any information that you have about the place you'll be meeting is important. And of course, discussing questions and concerns with the child. So instead of just rambling off all this stuff to them and leaving them to sit with it, at the very end of the explanation, you can say, what questions do you have? Instead of, do you have any questions? Because when you say, do you have any questions? They'll probably just say no. But if you say, what questions do you have? You're assuming they have a question, which makes it more welcoming to ask the question, and it feels less confrontational and less scary. So, that's a really helpful tip about any topic with a child, that you might be explaining. Say, what questions do you have? And that way they know that it's okay to ask a question. So here's a sample conversation, that you could share with a child if you don't know what to say. And it goes like this. You know how you have helpers at school to keep kids safe and having fun? Well, for now, we need someone like this when we spend time with mom, dad, whoever it might be. This is called supervised visitation, and it is a way to make sure you are safe and happy and having fun when you see XYZ. It's not anything you did, and it's not your fault. When you go to see XYZ, there will be a helper or an adult there to make sure everything goes smoothly. They are there to help you feel they are there to help you if you feel uncomfortable or scared. I know this probably feels unusual or uncomfortable. It's okay to be nervous or have big feelings about this. I will help you through this. You're not alone. So now that's a canned response, right? You're not going to read this verbatim, although you can if you really feel stuck. But if you just practice this and read it a few times before you speak with the child, then you at least have it in your head as like a model or a template, and the words will flow a lot more easily and you can make it your own. But this way, you're giving them the information, you're being honest and direct, you're validating their feelings, and you're letting them know that you're there for them. And of course, you would want to add on, what questions do you have? So again, we want to give as much of information as appropriate. And I didn't mention this in the other slide, but there's sometimes we can give too much information to a child, right? Like they don't need to know all the gory details or all the arguments or all the conflict that's going on about their parent. They just need to know what's happening for them. So all the background history of it, most young children can't handle. As children get older, they can handle a little bit more and a little bit more information. But in the beginning and when they're young, it's really just about mom or dad are unable to make safe decisions right now. And so this is how we're helping them learn to make healthy decisions. And so we need to have a helper there or me there or whatever it might be. Provide options and give control to the child if you can. I know this won't always be possible, but if you can provide options and give some control, that can be really empowering for the child and reduce their anxiety. So, letting them choose what game or what toy to bring, letting them choose a photo or something or a video to maybe show their parent or significant loved one, um, giving them an opportunity maybe to choose what time they see them or what day to see them, any way, any small way that you might be able to give some options is really important because they've already lost so much control, right? They've already lost so many things and they can't control so much of what's happening. So giving them, some things will be helpful. All right. This one's huge, and I don't know, again, if it's always possible, but I know sometimes it is, where either you or the child can get to know who's supervising the visit in advance. This, again, will reduce the anxiety, will help them feel more safe, will help them feel more comfortable. And the safer and more secure and comfortable they feel, the better the visit will go, and the less overwhelming anxiety it will cause them. So, if you can, again, always recommend that. reassuring them that they are safe, and that is why the visitation supervisor is there. So, this child may have had moments of extreme unsafety with this person they're going to see. Maybe they witnessed them hurt their mother. Maybe they witnessed them hurt their father. Maybe they hurt the child. And so we have to reassure them verbally and with information that they are safe. And that is why you are going to the visitation center to have the visit. And then answering questions with patience and compassion. So children will often ask the same question over and over again. It can feel really frustrating and annoying to an adult because you're like, I just answered this question yesterday, or I just answered this an hour ago. But children process information more slowly, and they need repetition, and they have to hear it over and over again for it really to sink in to the brain. And so they will often ask the same questions over and over, especially around confusing and upsetting topics like this. So try to remain patient and non-judgmental, and just answer the question if you can with compassion and patience. It's also okay to say, "I don't know the answer, and I wish I had an answer, but I don't, and I know how upsetting that can be. But if I do get the answer, I will tell you right away, and I'll always try to tell you as much information as I have." I had something else. Oh, about reassuring them that they're safe. Another thing we can do with the supervisors is have the child and the supervisor come up with a secret sign, not secret, I don't like to say secrets, but a special sign or symbol that they can make that lets the supervisor know that the child is feeling unsafe. So maybe it's a peace sign, maybe it's clapping their hands, maybe it's scratching the top of their head, something that can be just a communication between the child and the supervisor that lets the supervisor know that the child is feeling very unsafe or uncomfortable and needs a break. In this way, they again feel that they have some agency, some control over the situation. And that was, I guess I got ahead of myself. That's sort of part of the safety plan. And also, you could add other things on to a safety plan, like a visit safety plan. Okay, what happens if the visit doesn't go well? What happens if you don't want to, if you that you want to leave? What happens if you need a break? Like, come up with all the ways that the visit might not work out as planned, and come up with what are we going to do next if that happens. Putting it on the calendar can also be helpful. Of course, we never want to promise that a visit's going to happen because, again, that's something I saw in my role with children and families in foster care is that oftentimes there's so much disappointment and heartbreak that goes along with supervised visitation because the parent will not show up and or like unannounced, like cancel at the last minute. And there's just a lot of sadness that goes along with that. There's also sometimes relief. Maybe there's children that don't want to see this person and they're being forced to. So there could also be relief. So there's a lot of different emotions that come up around the visit happening or not happening. It's important to be cognizant and empathetic and validating for whatever the child is experiencing, whether it's relief, whether it's fear, whether it's anger, disappointment, sadness. But one of the things we can do is put it on the calendar as this is the date it's scheduled for, but I can't promise you it's going to happen. Sometimes things change, things come up, and we can't always promise that you are definitely going to see mom or dad that day, but it is scheduled for that day, and we'll do our best, and go from there. So yeah, I'm getting ahead of myself again, but don't make promises for the birth parent. We want to also normalize both and thinking. So you want to, there's a lot of ambiguous and sort of mixed up feelings that come with participating in visitation. And so it's possible that the child really, really, really wants to see mom or dad, but is also really angry at mom or dad or scared of mom and dad. Or maybe half of them wants to see mom and half of them doesn't want to see her. There's a lot of conflict, emotional conflict that's going on in these situations. And so helping them and normalizing and pointing out to them that maybe they're feeling both things at the same time can be validating. And when we validate someone's feelings and experiences, it brings down the temperature of their their anxiety or their big emotions and behaviors. Um, it's also helpful to play out like a best case and a worst case scenario when it comes to visits. So just saying like, okay, what's the best case? Like what's the best thing that could happen today at the visit? And you can kind of work through that mentally, out loud with them in conversation. And then what's the worst case scenario? You could have them make a list, you could have them just talk it out. Um, and or you can just have them think about it, but it's helpful, and again it reduces our overwhelm when we can think through logically like best case and worst case scenarios. That way our expectations are more balanced, um, and we're not sort of caught off guard if the worst situation does happen, and we also feel optimistic for the best case. I also like creating a plan A and a plan B with children, and this can be not only for visitation but for other events in their lives that might or might not happen. So I have a kiddo who really gets fixated on like the plan. So like if I tell her we're doing something and that falls apart for whatever reason, she has a difficult time with accepting that, and she's inflexible in that area at this point in her life. Hopefully we'll get to a better place with it, but what I am trying with her now is to create a plan A and a plan B. So instead of saying, this visit is happening and we're on our way and we're going, okay, plan A is we're going to the visit today and we're going to see whoever it is. Plan B, if that doesn't happen, is we're going to go visit somebody, or we're going to go get ice cream, or we're going to go to the park. Like have something planned in case plan A doesn't work. And that is also another way to help a child feel calm and regulated in their nervous system, because again, they're not just fixated on like the one thing happening. They understand that there's the possibility of a plan B and they know what it is. Any questions so far? I know I'm flying through this pretty fast, so I'm going to take a break for a second, and look at the question and answer. Let's see. My 5-year-old was going to start this through. Um, hmm. I see a question here, and it's quite personal, so I'm not going to share it with everybody. But I will respond to you, Courtney, and answer that for you. Let's see. I am a supervised visitation worker, and we always ensure we meet with the child first at our center and play with them so they feel comfortable and with the space and the worker. That's amazing. I love that. I know that it's not always possible, but it's so, so critical, and such a game changer. So thank you, Anna, for sharing that with us. And I hope that more people who are listening are able to do that as well. I'd love to hear in the question and answer box if you can also meet the child first or not. So that'd be nice I'd like to hear from you all if you're interested in sharing with me. Let's see. I know it's different in every state and every situation. So, all right. I'm going to head back. I don't see any more questions here for now. So I'm going to head back. Um, I just want to read this question. Okay. All right. Let me check my phone to make sure Sarah hasn't reached out to me. All right. Looks like I'm all good. All right. Thank you, guys. So the impact, and this is the hard part, because it does impact children. But when you understand how it's impacting them, instead of being so frustrated and overwhelmed by their behavior, you'll be able to have compassion and empathy for what's going on. And so that's why we're going to talk about the impact on children's not only mental health but their behavior as well. So from their perspective, and this is from real life examples of children I've worked with, how they feel, being asked how they feel about visitation. And these are some of the common responses that I get. They feel very uncertain. So they feel those two feelings at once. Like they want to see mom or dad, but they're scared, or they're angry, or they're sad, or they don't know, or they don't believe they're going to show up, or any number of things. So there's like these double feelings. So that's really common for kiddos, and it's extremely mentally exhausting to have no clear feeling. And I'm sure as an adult, you felt that before. Have you ever felt torn between two decisions? Oh, I don't think there's anything more mentally exhausting than being in decision or like grief limbo where you're not sure like what direction to go. And grief limbo or ambiguous loss is another term for what children in foster care are going through because the person is still alive, they're still out there in the world, but they can't see them all the time. They don't talk to them as much as they may have or want to. And so there's this loss that nobody's addressing. The child has lost that connection, that everyday interaction, and they feel as though there's nobody acknowledging that loss. And so this can be very painful and mentally and emotionally exhausting process, which is why we tend to see a lot of those big behaviors because their tolerance cup is overflowing. They have too much in their cup. They have all these thoughts and feelings and they're exhausted and their feelings and emotions are just exploding from this overwhelming experiences. So again, the mixed emotions, super common. Pressure to meet expectations of any of the parties involved. So some children feel pressured to perform a certain way during the visits to help out mom or dad, to make mom or dad look good. Some people feel pressured to um, or some kids feel pressure to act a certain way in front of the supervisor because they want the supervisor to like them or worried what they think about them or worried that they might remove them from their foster family or whatever it could be. There could be lots of worries about what the supervisor is thinking of their behavior, so they feel pressured to sort of live up to these expectations. And then of course, there's a lot of issues with loyalties and multiple desires of the people around them. So if the child is living with grandma um, and she knows that grandma really doesn't like mom or dad, going to visit mom and dad and spending time with that person feels like a disloyalty to grandma, right? And that can feel as though a betrayal is happening, which will trigger their fears of abandonment and rejection, which is the trauma that they already have from their parents. So understanding that children will really feel torn up inside over this experience is important to know so that you can understand why visits can be so difficult. And of course, children internalize and self blame for the events that are taking place. So instead of um, even if they say, "Oh, it's mom's fault, it's dad's fault, it's grandma's fault," whoever, even if they're saying that on the outside, most children internalize the bad things that are happening in their lives, so they will make it about them because that's just how children are. They're very self-centric and they tend to think that they have more control over the world than they actually do, and they will tend to blame themselves for whatever is going on, whether mom shows up or doesn't show up, whether dad um, you know gets his act together and stops using that. They blame themselves for lots of mom and dads and foster parents and kinship parents behavior. And so when we recognize that, we can try and do some things to take away some of that self blame. And they also report they just dislike being watched. They don't like being observed. It feels very unnatural, uncomfortable, and stressful for them. Let's see. So, why does it hurt so much? I mean, we've talked already a little bit about why it hurts so much. And so we'll just kind of review here with the ambiguous loss that is traumatic. And I do a whole webinar on ambiguous loss and helping children cope specifically with that experience. And so if you're interested, please again subscribe to my newsletter because I do that presentation periodically. I also have an old one posted on my YouTube channel. And my YouTube channel is just Beth Tyson Trauma Consulting. You can just search for that. And but this topic of ambiguous loss is really important for children in foster care um, and in kinship or adoptive families. So encourage you to learn more about that or reach out to me if you would like me to host a training for your organization because it's also something else that I do. They're often worried about parents' safety in between visits. So Oftentimes, children don't hear from or have any connection to their parents in between visits. And so that can be very worrisome, right? Wondering, is mom using again? Is she safe? Does she have somewhere to sleep at night? Am I going to see her again? There's all these thoughts and questions that are swirling around the child's head. And even if they don't act like it on the outside, they may seem fine. They may seem as though it's not bothering them. I can promise you it's always there. It's always on their mind. So not talking about it is not going to be helpful. The more we can elicit them to share their thoughts and feelings about the thoughts on their minds, the questions and concerns that they have, the better off. And I know a lot of times as adults, it's easier for us to just be like, oh, they look fine. They're fine. They're fine. They're fine. They're fine. I don't want to rock the boat. I don't want to upset them. But I promise you, they're always thinking about it anyway. So if you bring it up, you're not doing any more damage. It's really just important for them to know that you're there to talk about it with them, that you understand what they're going through, and that you'll get through it with them, and instead of trying to ignore the elephant in the room. Again, we've already kind of covered some of this, but rejection and disappointment from cancellations. And then the traumatic memories and emotions may resurface. So visits, unfortunately, can trigger a lot of trauma responses. And it's another reason why we see so many big emotions and behaviors after visits. So I want to go over some signs of complex PTSD, which is what children experience when they are going through something like this. Being removed from your family of origin, living with people you're not used to being with, having abuse or neglect in your past. These are all, what would you say, experiences of complex PTSD are experiences that can cause complex PTSD symptoms. So some things to keep an eye on, and this to the right is really more general for anybody, like for children or adults. These are some of the symptoms you'll see: the avoidance, the hyperarousal, complaints of stomach aches, headaches, body aches, maybe isolating themselves, being on their screens all the time, going to their room and just, avoiding everybody. That's another symptom. And also, of course, the behaviors, the acting out, the mood swings, the non-compliance, all of that is related to the trauma that they're going through. And any child who's in supervised visitation has experienced trauma. Like to me, that's just like a no-brainer. Any child who has to have their parents supervised while they spend time together has experienced trauma. Some other symptoms we see specifically in children will be bedwetting, or like a loss of developmental skills, maybe temporarily, around the time of visits. And so you might see a child that was sleeping through the night without wetting the bed or needing a diaper. Now they are, now they're having trouble getting through the night without wetting the bed. You might see a child who was gaining any type of developmental skill. You might see like a reversal of that, like like reversing to an earlier time in their childhood. So baby talk and throwing tantrums, throwing themselves on the floor, and things that look younger than their age. So their behavior could look younger than their age, and that's a common symptom. The somatic complaints, that just means like bodily feelings that they feel uncomfortable with. So stomach aches and headaches are very common with children who have experienced trauma to be reporting them frequently. And that's with no medical cause. So like you always want to get this checked first by a doctor to make sure that there's nothing physically wrong. But if all things have been checked and all things are well and all the tests are normal and they're still complaining of frequent stomach aches and headaches, then it's likely their anxiety. And that's something that I experienced as a child. I was like taking Pepto all the time. And looking back now as an adult, I'm like, oh, that was my anxiety. And I would always say, I always vocalized it as my stomach hurts. You might see rage and tantrums, which, if you are raising a child with trauma, you know pretty well firsthand. Tantrums beyond 20 minutes are unusual, or, not unusual, but like outside the norm. So if a child up till, the normal arc of a tantrum is about 20 minutes, like the average. So a child will become, kind of, it's like a mountain, right? Like they start ramping up, they start getting upset, they hit a peak, and then they start to come down. And that's sort of the normal arc of a tantrum. But children with trauma will often, tantrum beyond, way beyond that 20 minutes. And so that's kind of an indicator that this is a trauma response and not just a typical age appropriate behavior. They will have low frustration tolerance. And what low frustration tolerance is like, well, here's an analogy that I've been using with my daughter this week. So, we all have a fresh or a tolerance cup, and that tolerance cup is empty. But every time we pour a little bit of water, every time we have a stressor, a little bit of water goes into the cup. And so, maybe you wake up in the morning and you bump your head, and so a little bit of water goes in your cup. You're frustrated. Then you get to school, and the teacher calls on you, and you don't know the answer. A little bit more water in the cup. At recess, some kid makes fun of you because they don't like your shoes. More water in the cup. Um, you're nervous because you have a visit with mom next week, and you're not sure if she's going to show up. Well, now you're pouring a lot of water in the cup, and the cup is overflowing, right? So we don't, when we have a cup that's too full with too much stress or frustration, all of that, that tolerance cups overflows, and we no longer have the ability to tolerate stressors in our life. And so you're going to learn in a little bit how we can sort of let some of the water out of that cup instead of being overwhelmed all the time. And this is not an analogy I created. I found it on Big Life Journal, which is a great resource for children's mental health. You might see self-harm behavior, like hitting themselves, banging their head, maybe even cutting or harming their body in some way. And you might see self-sabotaging behavior. So around visits, you might see that, maybe mom or dad hasn't been showing up for visits, and things have been kind of stable at home because they haven't been going to the visits. And then suddenly the court orders visits, and now there's this additional stressor. You might see the child begin to decompensate in some of the progress that they've made. You might see them getting into trouble again at school. You might see them talking back to you more. You might have them being defiant or non-compliant, and that is a way to sort of destroy what they've built, because it feels as though being in a healthy relationship just seems like hopeless. So it's like, why even bother? Why even continue trying to build this relationship, or be this type of person, because it's just going to get ruined anyway. And so you'll see some of that self-sabotaging behavior in children who have learned that things don't always go the way that they had hoped. And what also happens is, there's changes in our brain that are taking place when we're under stress. And I like this visual because it's really simple, and it's not, what would you say? It's not to be taken as literal, like literal, actual, this is the way your brain works. It's much more complicated than this. But this is a simple way to understand that when we have a stressed brain, we have less control over our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and actions. And when we have an unstressed brain, we have better control over our thoughts, emotions, and actions. So, all this frustration and stress and fear, sadness, all those things building up in their tolerance cup, going to make it a lot harder for them to control their thoughts, emotions, and actions in a clear way. All right, I'm going to take another break and hop back into see the questions, see if there are any questions. Let's see. I have one here. What are some considerations for supervised visitation for children whose father abused and got sentenced uh, guilty for her big sister? There's been no contact for over a year now with the father or his extended family. Oof, that's tough. That is really tough. Um, wow. Um, Again, I think, there's some situations that there's no perfect solution for, right? This is definitely one of them. I think that it's all the things I've been talking about today about preparing them emotionally and mentally, about providing them with some control over the situation in any small way that you can find or a big way. It's about helping them feel as safe and as comfortable as they possibly can. And that's kind of what we're going to go into in the next couple of screens. So hopefully you'll take away uh, some skills and strategies in the next few minutes. All right. Feel free to, I love getting the questions, so feel free to keep popping those in if things come up, or comments too. I know it's a question and answer box, but if you just want to comment that you liked that suggestion, or you are looking forward to trying that, or anything, or if you have criticism of any of it too, feel free to pop that in. I'm always learning and I'm always open to different perspectives. And so feel free to use that question and answer as sort of like a chat with me specifically, and not just about questions. All right, so I'm going to share this video with you now. It's under 3 minutes, and I'm one of the co-creators of this video and many others in this series. So I helped an organization called Connect Our Kids create an animated series of videos to help children and teens cope with childhood trauma, loss, abuse, neglect. And this is really aimed for children who are in foster care or have been touched by the child welfare system in some way. I helped create all like the background psychological educational stuff, and then the animation studio took that information, that scripts that I would write, and along with two other trauma specialists, and would put them in, would use their creativity to come up with these amazing videos. So I just wanted to share this one with you because it does have some coping tools for teens and young adults, and it would be really helpful if you have a young person in your life to go to YouTube and check out this series on how to help them cope with childhood trauma. And this is just one of 13 videos in the first season, and season 2 is being released right now. And so each Thursday, a new video is being released in season 2. So hop over there. And
today we're talking about
hop over to YouTube and look for All Connected, a place for belonging, and you'll find these videos. So here we go.
Tools. Well, no, not those kinds of tools. Coping tools, which are the practices and habits that we use to help tolerate and reduce the stress we encounter in life. They're our brain's way of dealing with stressful situations. But some are a lot more helpful than others. Remember that deep breathing exercise you learned? That's a great example of a healthy coping tool. On the flip side, there are plenty of not so healthy coping tools people use every day to deal with the stress in their lives. Things like drugs, alcohol, and unhealthy relationships might feel like immediate relief, but ultimately just create problems for you in the future. It's important to develop healthy coping strategies now so that when the stressors of life do pop up, you'll be able to handle it in the healthiest way possible. Here are a few examples that may work well for you. Try focusing on a specific task. Things like cooking a meal, cleaning the house, or organizing your closet work really well. Or try practicing mindfulness. For example, journaling, meditation, or creating a gratitude list. You can also try setting a pace for your day, building in breaks and setting specific times to go outdoors without your phone. Another great coping tool is exercise. Walking, running, dancing, basketball, anything that'll get your body moving. When you exercise, your body releases special chemicals called endorphins, which are produced naturally in your nervous system. They help us cope with pain, deal with stress, just feel good. Just remember, coping tools aren't one size fits all, so feel free to try a variety of tools to see what works best for you. A good coping tool should help get you to a place where you feel able to handle life's turbulence. And when you find a practice that you feel like that, congrats! You found a healthy coping tool.
I just love that little brain. He is so cute. So as you can see, these are short videos, so they keep the attention of young people. And they're also very entertaining while also being educational. So they are all trauma informed. They've all been vetted by trauma experts and specialists. And so I encourage you to watch them alongside a young person who might need to understand what has happened to them in the past and develop some skills for overcoming it. Um, I don't encourage you to let them watch them alone, and I always recommend that you watch the video first by yourself to make sure that it's appropriate for the child, and then watch it together. And of course, always ask them for any questions or if they would like to talk about it. It might just be like a jumping off point to talk about some difficult stuff if you don't know how to bring it up. These are free and available to anyone to access on YouTube. All right, let's see. Love to hear what you think of these, by the way. So either email me or put it in the question and answer. I'd love to hear what you thought. All right. Let me check on Sarah and see how things are going. Okay. Says it's going great so far from her side, so we'll keep rocking and rolling here. All right. How do I get to the next screen?
Today we're talking about tools. Well, no, not.
Hold on a second. There we go. Okay. So what are these coping tools that I suggest? And here's sort of the meat and potatoes of what we're trying to learn here today. Some basic stuff, right? Like the video talked about, focusing on nutrition, exercise, sleep hygiene, especially. I can't speak enough about the importance of sleep, especially for children. They need way more sleep than we realize. And when they don't have enough sleep, they quickly become dysregulated, or their tolerance cup is going to overflow much faster, because when you don't have sleep, you also don't have as much tolerance for stress, and because they have so much stress they're dealing with, that sleep becomes even more important. So I always say, like, make sleep your priority before everything else, like, if possible. Make before sports, before homework, before visits with family. Like, their sleep needs to be really, really up at the top of the priority list. Set some routines before and after visits. So again, they know what to expect, and it's sort of the same thing each time. So maybe there's something you guys do every time, like a ritual that you do every time before the day before a visit, or even the morning before a visit. Maybe it's something just the two of you do, or just the family does together, that connection time. And try and find, these little moments where you can just spend time peacefully in their presence without expecting anything from them, without giving them a lecture, without guiding them or teaching them anything, but just being with them and not being distracted by phones, by screens, by other people in the room, but just really observing them as who they are, and feeling present together. Lowering your expectations. And, I know this can be a tough one for caregivers, but when we have super high expectations, we tend to get disappointed. And when we get disappointed, then we get angry and frustrated. And so we really have to understand just how much these kids are going through, and how miraculous it is that they even get up and go to school every day. I mean, that right there, takes an enormous amount of courage, and after going through what they've been through. So sort of setting the bar a little bit lower. And I don't mean that to sound, what would you say? I mean, we always want children to live up to their highest expectations, right? But sometimes our adult expectations are way beyond what the child is actually capable of, especially for children with trauma. They may be 12, but psychologically, emotionally, developmentally, they may only be 8. And so we might be expecting 12-year-old behavior, 12-year-old manners, 12-year-old memory, capabilities that just aren't there. And so we tend to have way more expectations for children than they are actually able to handle. And it's also confusing for adults because they might be very capable in one area but are totally lacking the skills in the other areas. So maybe your child is a really great communicator, can talk to a room full of people and, just really can be like charismatic and interesting and very intelligent, but then emotionally they're not so strong. And that's very common for all children, but especially people with trauma in their history. Respecting their boundaries. So if they don't want to talk about the visit, let that be okay. You can always check in and say, "Hey, how did it go?" But if it's I don't want to talk about it, or don't ask me that question, or I don't want to talk about whatever it is, like just respect their boundaries and know that when they're ready, they can talk to you about it. And that's really just all you want to do is just let them know that when they're ready, you're there. But we don't want to keep forcing them to give us every detail of the visit, even though, we want to know, right? It's so hard to control our own curiosity and worries and fears. But, when we push them, they tend to just push back on it. And so it's important to respect their boundaries in that way. And then I taught you in the beginning of this meeting, but the buzzy breathing for children can be really more interesting for them than just do deep breathing. And listen, breathing isn't going to solve all your problems. It's not going to solve all their problems either. But if we get into a habit of taking a couple of slow and controlled breaths throughout the day, you'd be surprised at how it can regulate our nervous system. So when we get the breathing helps to get oxygen to our brain and our body, which helps us, lower our heart rate and helps us feel more grounded and more present and more clear thinking. And so that's why people are always pushing, oh, the deep breathing, the meditation. And I'm like burnt out from it, to be honest, because I work in this field and I just feel like it's everybody's answer, right? It's not going to solve everything, but it might take the tension off just a little bit. And it's a great habit to get into. The more often you do it, the more effective it becomes. So it's not going to work the first time. It's not going to work the 10th time, but if it becomes part of your daily routine, that's when it starts to really make a difference. Some really important part of this is increasing trust and safety in their relationships with you, with their teachers, with anyone else in the home. Feeling safe and able to trust your caretakers is the most important thing for a child who's experienced trauma, because what they learned from their trauma is that the world and the people in it are not safe and are not trustworthy. And our relationship with children who believe that is an opportunity to be a corrective emotional experience. And that's just a long way of saying that, we're going to be that person who breaks that belief. We need to be the person who is trustworthy, who is safe. And we'll have to show them that time and time and time again before we will override that old belief that the world is unsafe and untrustworthy. Ways we can do that is by providing extra co-regulation time. So co-regulation time is not just about being calm together. Co-regulation and calm often get, what would you say, overlapped. Like if you look up what is co-regulation, you're going to get 100 articles that talk about how it means being calm while you're with your child. And that's a nice place to start, but it's not the whole picture. Co-regulation means that you are connected and present and feeling what the child is feeling and riding the emotional waves with them. So it's not just that you're going to be calm and pleasant all the time, because that could be incongruent with what is actually happening. And you could actually be shutting down or dissociating from what the child is feeling because you can't handle it. And you may look very calm, but internally, you're not in connection with that child. If somebody is dysregulated, and you are trying to co-regulate with them, you are also going to become dysregulated for a portion of the interaction. So that's common. It's not just about being calm all the time. We don't want to join in with the chaos and lose it, right? But we're going to feel what they're feeling. And the idea is that we come alongside them and we grab their hand, and our nervous systems link up invisibly. They do. They will link up, and this ability to feel as though they're not alone in their discomfort, that they're not alone in their pain, is what's going to help their nervous system to regulate and calm down. Offering playtime, play therapy can be especially helpful for children with trauma. But if you don't have access to play therapy, which many people don't, um, what you can do is provide figurines, a dollhouse, like different puppets or different things that they can act out their experiences with, because trauma children under 12 tend to act out their trauma in play. So that's how they process it. That's how they get through it, is through their play. So as long as they're being safe and they're not harming themselves or others, allow them to act out in whatever way they need to. And it might not make sense to you. It might look scary at times. It might be concerning to you. Of course, you always want to reach out to a mental health professional if you have concerns, but allowing them to play through that is actually incredibly healing and part of the process. So I encourage you to find some things online that, or at the store, where they can act out a family situation, um, and those figurines can be really helpful. Try to stay connected with their birth family between visits if possible. I know that's not always possible if the birth parent isn't engaged, but maybe it's texting, or maybe it's sending a little video. Maybe it's having a phone call or a Zoom, but finding ways to keep in touch. Now, if you can't keep in actual touch with the person, maybe you keep in touch with their birth family between visits by bringing things in from their family traditions, their family culture, and their past that are positive, that you can continue on with the child, even though they're not still in their family of origin. So maybe the child loved mom's lasagna, making lasagna with the child in between visits can be helpful. Maybe dad was really funny, maybe you point out that the child has dad's sense of humor. There's positive in everybody, even though it might be hard to find when you feel really angry or hurt by the person, but there is usually something positive that you can find in another human being, regardless of what they've done. And so I encourage you to try and find those things and then point them out to the child, because children self-identify with their parents, with their birth parents. So if they hear that mom and dad are bad people or are this or that, and they're hearing a lot of negative talk, they are going to, again, internalize that, believe that they are also bad. It reinforces the reason why they should continue to sabotage things, and why they should continue to act the way they are, and why they should continue to push people away, because they're no good, terrible, bad people, because that's what they're hearing about their parents. And if their parents are, quote unquote, bad people, I'm not labeling them that. I'm just using easy language. If they are troubled people, or if they are being labeled in negative ways, then the child thinks, I must be bad too, because I came from them. That's just logic to them. It's like, I came from that person. I was a part of that person. If they're bad, I'm bad too. It's just the way they tend to think. Of course, not for every child. I can't speak for every child, but these are like common things that I see. So I got ahead of myself again there, but yes, trying to stay positive, or at least neutral about their parents. So if you can't find something positive to say, just trying to stay neutral. Just try to, not show a ton of opinions, a negative opinions about their parents. And then try to view yourself. It can be really helpful to view yourself as a co-parent or a family coach, especially in a foster parent situation, because um, we tend to think that when a child comes into foster care, it's only the child who needs help. And unfortunately, that's not true. It's the adult that also, the parent that also needs love and support and healing and people who care about them, because this is a cycle, right? This likely didn't start with the child. This is likely in a situation where the parent was also abused, neglected, traumatized, and nobody was there to help them. So they turned to drugs, alcohol, gambling, who knows what, relationships, all sorts of things, because they didn't have the help that they needed when they were young. And so if we can try to see ourselves, caregivers, professionals, as a coach, someone that's not just helping the child, but also has compassion and empathy for the parent. That's what's going to be best for the child. And I know that it's not always easy. Look, it took me a long time to get to that place. I was very angry when I first came into this work. I was very much on the side of the child, and lacking empathy for the biological parents. And while I still feel that way sometimes, I try to remember them as children who didn't get what they needed and who didn't have safety and trust, and to see it as sort of a package deal. If we don't help the parent, we're not really helping the child. So some somatic exercises, which means that we're going to manage some big emotions inside ourselves. We can do this as adults. It works with children as well. What we're going to do is really sort of get our bodies moving and try to cope with the anxiety, the sadness, the anger through movement. So one of my favorite go-to things, and actually I was just doing it last night because, like I said, we've been going through some stuff as a family. Um, One thing I like to do is butterfly taps, and what that looks like is crossing your arms like this over your chest and tapping each shoulder back and forth while taking some slow inhales and exhales, or doing the buzzy breathing. Um, and what this does is send signals of safety to your nervous system. The reason why that is, it's something called bilateral stimulation. And this is a process where, you're integrating both sides, both hemispheres of the brain by crossing your arms across your midline, this is your midline, um, and tapping on alternating sides. So when you integrate both sides of your brain, it helps to uh, regulate your nervous system. We also have arm swinging. So anything where your kind of feet planted in place and like swinging your arms back and forth. This can feel so good. This is one of my favorite somatic exercises. You can imagine like clearing the space around you, creating sort of a protective area that's only for you when you're swinging your arms back and forth, and letting your arms like be limp and standing with your feet firmly planted and twisting your hips and your arms back and forth, can be very soothing, again, to your nervous system. Mirror dancing. This is a great one to not only get the energy in your body moving, sort of get the trauma moving and get the emotions to dissipate, but you also are connecting at the same time. So you and a child could face each other um, and and mirror each other's movements. So when you're doing a funny dance, they do a funny dance. Then they take a turn. They do something funny, then you do something funny, or any type of dancing. And that way you're connecting. You're making eye contact, and eye contact is a cue for safety, as long as it's a safe relationship. Other times, eye contact might, that's a whole other slide, but eye contact can be very confrontational for children with trauma. So sometimes we need to discern whether or not they want eye contact. But in this situation, if they're feeling safe and regulated, and you're in a good situation where you're having positive emotions, and some eye contact can be really helpful at building trust. Scribbling with both hands. Again, this is that bilateral stimulation, and you're stimulating both hemispheres of the brain. And when you scribble with both sides of your hands, it releases, some of that tension and that anxiety that you're feeling. It also can just be like a distraction, because it's not easy to use both hands while you're drawing or scribbling, and so that can also be a way to sort of help a child who seems to be escalating into difficult behaviors. This is another one of my favorites that we do at home. It's called Fold the Laundry Game, and this is one that I actually came up with my daughter. And so, a lot of children who have been in foster care or have a history of neglect or abuse did not get a lot of the physical touch that they needed as young children, and they didn't get the sensory input that they needed. So they may have a craving for touch. You may notice that. They may have a craving to be held and to do things that children their age typically wouldn't be interested in. And so folding the laundry is a game I came up with that's a safe, fun way to have connection and touch that doesn't violate any boundaries. And of course, this is only with the consent of the child, asking them if they're comfortable with it and everything. And it's a way to integrate some of that sensory deprivation. So what I have her do is like pretend she's a piece of laundry, like get all kind of crinkled up and messed up in a ball. She's looking kind of messy in her body, and then I take, like, say she's crumpled up in a ball. Then I take one arm and I stretch it all the way out. Then I take the other arm and I stretch that one all the way out. Then I grab one foot and I stretch that all the way out to the other side and the other side. And then we fold up the laundry. So maybe I take that hand that was like up here and I fold it back this way. And then I take the other hand and I fold it back that way. And then I take the legs and, I fold them up in some funny or silly way. And this not only gets the child laughing, again, this is for children like probably 10 and under, but it's also a great way to integrate their sensory needs. And shaking it out. And this is a great one for adults too. When we shake the large muscles of our body, it helps to release some of those stress hormones that have been built up. And shaking is something we see in nature. When animals are under attack and they feel as though they cannot escape from a predator, they freeze, right? They go into the trauma responsive freeze. They might play dead. But then as they're coming out of the playing dead role, they will shake. And that shaking is a way that we believe, of course, there's different theories on this, and who knows, psychology is changing all the time, but we believe that the shaking after a trauma response is actually helping the body release some of that anxiety, tension, stress hormones. So intentionally shaking your body and your muscles are a great way to calm your nervous system. All right, let me go in and check because I've been doing a lot of talking. Let's see. Any more questions? I got some responses from the video. Said, I thought the video was great. I'm going to use them for my teen and tweens as well as my younger child. Thank you, Courtney. My only suggestion is that you make sure before you show them to a younger child that you watch it first. Make sure it's something that they will find appropriate for their age. And then Chelsea said, what a neat video, sharing with my foster homes on my caseload to help their kiddos. Fantastic. I love how you're explaining co-regulation. Thank you, Donna. And what does staying neutral look like? Great question. I think staying neutral can look like just not being negative, right? So just validating what the child is feeling and experiencing, but without taking an aside, without taking an opinion, without we can disapprove of mom or dad's behavior without attacking them. Do you know what I mean? So it can kind of be more like, yes, I know you're really disappointed in XYZ. You have every right to feel that way, and I'm sorry that you're going through this. So that's So when you're saying that, you're not bad mouthing, right? You're not saying like, "Oh, I can't believe they did this again. They're so terrible. What a loser. What a this. What a that." You're not like going off and sort of saying all these negative things about the child. You're validating what they're experiencing, but you're just reflecting. I guess what you're doing is you're kind of just reflecting back to the child what they are feeling without putting your own sort of angry or negative opinion on it. I hope that helps, but I could definitely go through that more in another webinar. Thanks for the question, though, Stefan. And I hope I said your name right. Okay, so thanks for those great comments. I really appreciate the positive feedback. And again, I love hearing from you guys. So it makes this more fun for me because I feel like I'm over here by myself in a vacuum. All right, back to the presentation. Let's see how much I got. 15 minutes left. I have 15 minutes left or 13 minutes left. Let's see. All right. Sorry, guys. I'm just making sure I get through everything. So the CARES model for calm connection is something I developed and created. And it's basically, a little model and something to memorize to help you in a moment of dysregulation for both you and the child to sort of remind yourself of or what are the important pieces I need to handle right now. And if you do at least some of these, you're making progress. You're on the right track. Okay. So maybe you hang this up on your fridge and you memorize it, or you hang it up in the bathroom mirror where you look every day, or somewhere you can see it so that you can remember the steps that when your child is having a meltdown, a tantrum, they're stuck in a trauma response. These are some things we can do. So first is consent. Before we approach a child, especially someone who may have experienced abuse, and we never know, right, if a child has or not. Sometimes we know, sometimes we don't know. That's why it's so important that we at least uh, warn, I guess, or prepare the child for any sort of touch that might be coming. So instead of just like sitting down next to someone and immediately putting your arm around them or trying to hug them or trying to even put a hand on their shoulder, you really want to say at the very beginning, if you have a child who's upset, I can see you're very upset. Can I come close? Is it okay if I sit next to you? Is it okay if I sit down with you? I won't, I won't touch you or hug you unless you want me to. So just making sure that, physical touch is approved of by the child as much as they can, without, just coming right over and grabbing their hand or even putting your hand on their shoulder can be very activating for a child who's had abuse. So being aware of that is always my first suggestion. Once you've let them know, like, hey, is it all right if I come sit next to you, and honor whatever they say. They may say, no, I need to be alone right now. Okay, well then come back later and try this try this again, or say, I will give you a break and go sit on the other side of the room for a few moments. So sometimes you can't always engage right then and there. They may need a minute. If they're like, yeah, I don't mind, then it's okay to come close. um, Acknowledge what they're feeling. I can see you're upset. I can understand why you're upset. It makes sense that you're upset. Sort of acknowledging as well as reflecting and empathizing with their experience. So acknowledging, what happened, what went wrong, can be important. Reflecting to them what you see. So reflecting that you look really angry right now. Your fists are clenched. I bet your heart is pounding. Your face seems really red. Kind of letting them know what some of their symptoms of anger or overwhelm are, so that they can also begin that emotional intelligence and learning what their symptoms of becoming overwhelmed are, and empathizing with their experience. So that can sound like um, this is a really difficult experience for you, and um, it's okay to be upset. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be angry. We all get angry sometimes. Letting them know that whatever they're feeling is normal and valid given what they've experienced. A lot of these children have very valid rage because of what they've been through. And they need to be able to let out some of that rage with people that they trust. And so if they trust you, you will likely be the one on the receiving end of the rage, the tantrums, the behaviors. And it's not because they don't like you or hate you or don't want to be near you. Kids who will show you their rage are often children who are beginning to trust you. And unfortunately, that's usually the moment that we turn away from them, right? Because we feel rejected. That activates our old stuff. We feel abandoned and rejected, hopeless. And so we get all twisted up. And then, the relationship begins to unravel. But if we can recognize that children who are showing us their rage and their anger and their sadness and all these feelings, that we are actually somebody that they're beginning to trust, will not abandon them for having those feelings. And lastly, in the CARES model, sharing about your own experiences. So being vulnerable and sharing with a child, like, anything that you've been through that's similar. It doesn't have to be the exact same situation, but maybe it's a time you were really disappointed. Maybe it's a time that you felt really afraid or sad. And of course, we don't want to turn this into a situation where you're leaning on them for support. I'm saying that you share a little bit so they know that they're not the only ones who have been through some hard stuff, and that can help to build some trust. We never want to lean on a child to give us support for what we're still working through, but we can say, this is what I went through, and I felt the same way too, and I got through it, and I know you're going to get through it too. And some more just those active listening skills. So finding a time and place that doesn't feel confrontational. That can be oftentimes in times when you're side by side. So whether you're going for a walk or sitting in the car together, but for children and teens especially, it can feel much less confrontational to be sitting side by side where you don't have to face each other in the eye, because that eye contact can be very confrontational for children, so and unnerving, and kind of feel nervous about that. So finding time where you're not necessarily looking at each other in the face can be very helpful for getting them to open up and share about what they're feeling. Listening to understand and not to respond. So we tend to get in a habit of thinking about what we're going to say while the other person is talking. What I encourage you to do is just really try to listen to what they're saying and just simply, in simple terms, reflect back what you heard them say. That will help the person not only feel heard and seen, but it will also help them to continue to open up to you. Oh, got ahead of myself again. Reflect what you hear. And don't try to problem solve, sit with it, sit with the uncomfortable feelings and the pain. Not every problem is solvable right in this moment. Sometimes we just need someone to sit there with us in it and let us know that we're not alone. So less talking and more just physical presence and being connected with empathy and not with an agenda to fix this issue right now. And again, the both and thinking, where you really miss your mom and you can't be with her. So that's an example, but pointing out there's two sides of every coin can be helpful to help them organize what they're experiencing inside their bodies. The good news is that the power of your relationship, like I mentioned earlier about those corrective emotional experiences, this research bears out that this is true from Harvard University. The studies they've done on children who have experienced early life adversity and their relationships with at least one trusting adult. It shows over time, over longitudinal studies, that one committed, loving adult can mitigate the impact of trauma and loss. The good news there is the more committed, loving adults we have in a child's life, the more we're going to mitigate that trauma, right? So one can do it, but if you have more, that's ideal. So trying to find those supportive people, maybe it's a mentor, maybe it's an uncle, maybe it's a neighbor, maybe, trying to find those people who will show up for that child and be a part of their lives consistently can do more positive change than almost any of these other strategies. Children need to feel like they belong to somebody, that they are claimed by somebody. And that's a term one of my colleagues, Allison Davis Maxon, uses. She talks about children needing to feel claimed. And that is really at the root of this. We all want to feel claimed, right? We all want to feel like we belong somewhere to somebody that cares about us no matter what we do. And unfortunately, a lot of these children don't have that experience yet, but you can be the one to claim them. More research that shows what positive childhood experiences are. It was done by Johns Hopkins University in 2019. So, positive childhood experiences are the reverse or the flip side of adverse childhood experiences. And just like everything in life, the negative tends to get more attention than the positive, right? And so we all probably know on this call what adverse childhood experiences are. And if you don't, I encourage you to go to acesconnection.com to learn more. But positive childhood experiences, they don't get so much press. And so I'm here to tell you that there are 7 things that have been studied and researched that show to be mitigating for the impact of trauma. And this was studied on children who had several ACEs and also several PCEs. And over long-term studies show that these are the 7 things that lead to more positive outcomes later in life. So feeling supported and claimed by family, belonging in school, so having a school community that is accepting and there for you. 2, non-parent adults who genuinely care about you. So maybe that's, like I said earlier, a coach, teacher, a mentor, a neighbor, somebody that believes in the child. Ability to talk with family about their feelings. So having that two-way communication, feeling safe enough to talk to their family members. Enjoyment in community traditions. Traditions can be incredibly powerful ways to connect and to feel like you belong to something. Feeling supported by friends and feeling safe and protected at home. So I have lots more sort of little goodies here to go over, but I'm going to have to sort of shuffle through these quickly because I'm towards the end. Let me see how many slides I have left. Man, I could go all day. Okay, I just have these 2 slides. So free play in nature, access to outdoors. I know that's not possible for everybody if you live in a big city and it's not safe, but if you can, take a day trip out to a park or spend time in nature frequently, that being outdoors is very regulating and calming and can be a stepping stone to attachment. So if you can start to feel comfortable in nature or with animals, then you might be able to sort of scaffold that to feeling comfortable and safe with people. So if you have a child who doesn't feel safe with anybody, starting with nature and animals can be a stepping stone. Some other things you probably already have seen or heard me say. A memory box I'll go over is just like a place where they can go and visit memories from the person. So if it's, we tend to think of these when someone has died, but even children who are separated like this from their biological parents also need a memory box. So maybe it's little trinkets, little mementos, photos, things they made for them, anything can go in the memory box. And it can be a place for the child to visit and to grieve for, the loss of what could have been, what should have been, to grieve for the loss of that relationship in the way that it was supposed to unfold. Life books, I'm sure some of you have heard of those, but that's a great way to create a narrative for a child to help them create self-identity. I encourage you to Google life books if you haven't heard of that before. Family search and engagement, so connecting them to their culture, their history, their lineage, animals and nature we went over. And when the child is ready, of course, this is not something you ever force on a child, but maybe a teen or a young adult, they may be at a point where they want to give back and they want to help others who have been through similar situations. And so volunteering or being a mentor or giving back in some way can be incredibly healing. Key takeaway is a child who shows you their rage doesn't think you are an easy target. They think you are someone who won't abandon them. And that kind of speaks to what I talked about earlier about how when they start to feel as though they can trust you, it's when you tend to see a lot of these big emotions come out. And so if you have a child who's getting angry after visits, it's because they trust that you can handle it and that you won't abandon them. So hang in there. I know that this is incredibly hard times and hard stuff. And I just have all the respect and admiration for what you do for children every day. There's no more important job in the world than helping raise and guide young souls into this world and through these tragedies. So truly, you are making the biggest difference you possibly could with the work that you do, and I couldn't be more grateful. So, thank you all for being here today. I would love for you to check out my book, A Grand Family for Sullivan, that is already on Amazon. This is my first children's book, and it is available on Amazon to help children cope with ambiguous loss and what it's like to be part of a grand family, which is also, grandparents or relatives who are raising other relatives' children. Please stay in touch with me. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear some feedback. There is a survey I think is going to go out to you after the end of this webinar that you could just fill in. I think 3 questions would be amazing just to get a little feedback and hear what you thought of this today and whether or not I should host it again in the future. Again, the video recording should be going out as well. That will be available for 30 days to rewatch and take notes or go back and look at something. And of course, please sign up for my newsletter at bethtyson.com and find me on social media. I love interacting with all of you. It's really the passion of my life. What I do is some of the most meaningful and purposeful accomplishments in my life. And I'm really grateful that I get to be a part of it with all of you. So going to check the question box one last time before we close out. If you want to hang on and you put a question in the box, I'll see if there's a couple of questions. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys. You're welcome. I'm so glad you were all here and we're able to take this in. So there's a question: how does CARES, mainly consent, work when a child is self-harming, violent outburst, hitting others, destroying property, threatening more serious self-harm, such as stating that they want to get a knife to stab themselves? Okay, that's crisis. That's crisis stuff. So you really need a child who's doing that, it sounds like they need a higher level of care. And so, they're not in their right mind. They're not able to make those good decisions right then. And so it's really about their safety only at that point. So whatever you can do to keep them safe is really going to be the most important for children. For one of my recommendations is to keep pillows in every room of your house. If you have a child who becomes violent, or hits people or you or destroys things, keep some pillows in every room in the house. And that way, in a crisis moment, you can grab a pillow to protect yourself or the child or another child. It may not protect them completely, but it's something, and it can help you feel as though you have at least some option there. The other thing to do is have an emergency contact person and a safety plan. So maybe it's your neighbor, maybe it's your aunt, your sister, your cousin, somebody who's nearby who might be able to step in and de-escalate a situation. Obviously, if it really is a safety issue, you want to contact 911 or 988 is another option I mentioned at the beginning of this call for mental health crises. But you really also want to familiarize yourself with the in-home crisis call center. A lot of places in America have that. I don't know for those of you who are international, but there are family crisis lines that you can call to have someone come out to the house. So, once it becomes beyond keeping people safe, you really need a higher level of intervention. So, having an emergency contact and having pillows around to protect yourself, or, again, they're not foolproof. They're not going to stop every situation, but I wish I had a better answer for that one. I hope what I shared helps. So another person said, thanks for sharing about the power of the relationship. As a solo parent, I really needed to hear that. I totally get it. I totally get that. And you're not alone. And it really is just about that one consistent person. Um, Lots of thank yous. And yeah, I guess we're going to finish up. Thank you all for being here. I will, again, this link should be sent to you shortly. I'm not sure when exactly, but it should be out shortly. And I hope to hear from you and see you on social media. Talk to you all soon. Bye.